This is part 2 of our lesson on finding midpoints of segments. Last time, we had coordinates of endpoints of a segment in a coordinate plane, where the segment ended up being horizontal, like in number 3, or it ended up being vertical, like in number 4. And we noticed that to find the midpoint, all we were really doing was averaging the x's and averaging the y's. It's a really easy way to remember to find midpoint. One word, average. Number 5 is a little bit trickier. If you notice, when you plot point E and you plot point F, it doesn't give you a horizontal segment. It doesn't give you a vertical segment. This segment is diagonal. It still has a midpoint, but trying to approximate it is going to be pretty difficult. You might have a decent idea of where it may be, but to know the exact coordinates is a challenge. You're going to combine those two examples that we just looked at. You're going to average the x's and average the y's. That's what the midpoint formula tells us. This actually comes to us in the form of a theorem. We're going to talk a lot about theorems this year. This is theorem 2.6. To find the midpoint of a segment in a coordinate plane that is neither vertical nor horizontal, we're going to use the midpoint formula. So the capital M is the name of the point. It's a midpoint. So remember, midpoints have an x value and a y value. To find the x value, you take the x coordinates of your endpoints and add them, then divide by 2. You do the same thing with the y's. You're going to add them as well and divide by 2. Some people get caught up in this x sub 2 plus x sub 1 business, y sub 2 plus y sub 1. If you wanted to switch those around, you could, because x sub 2 plus x sub 1 is the same thing as x sub 1 plus x sub 2. Let me just give you an example using easy numbers. 3 plus 5 is 8. Well, 5 plus 3 is also 8. So it's not changing your answer if you would happen to switch those around. Number 6, if you notice, is exactly the same as number 5, except there's no coordinate plane. I color-coded the x values and the y values to help you. Over here we have the midpoint formula, and we're just going to substitute our coordinates in. So our x values, x sub 2 and x sub 1, we're calling x sub 2 the negative 3. And we're calling the x sub 1 the positive 2. We're going to add those and then divide by 2. Do the same thing with the y's. Since we called x sub 2 the negative 3, we're going to call y sub 2 the positive 5. Y sub 1 would be negative 7. So we're going to add those two together in that second line there, 5 plus negative 7. We're going to divide that by 2 also. We're averaging, adding, and dividing by 2. Don't make this sound or feel more complicated than it is. You're adding and dividing by 2 twice. Okay, so if we jump down from the second line to the third line, we have negative 3 plus 2. That's negative 1. We also have a 5 plus a negative 7, which is negative 2. Now, that gives us two fractions. And we know you aren't a huge fan of fractions. Fractions, it's just an operation of division. That's all we're doing. We're dividing two numbers. Negative 1 divided by positive 2, you can leave it like that. That fraction doesn't simplify. But on the other side, the negative 2 divided by positive 2, that does simplify to negative 1. So your answer for your midpoint, the coordinates would be negative 1/2 and negative 1. And again, if you don't like expressing your answer as a fraction, you could express it as a decimal. Negative 1/2 is the same thing as negative 0.5. So you can replace those if you want. Just so you're aware, on a standardized test, like an SAT or a PSSA or a Keystone or whatever type of test you may have to take, you're going to see the fraction version instead of the decimal version. Okay, so this number 6 was worked out for you. You can definitely work these out on your own by hand, doing it this exact same way. You can also use your calculator. Please just be aware, if you're going to do both operations at once, that you need to use parentheses when you're adding your x's or your y's. Remember the average problem we had in the beginning with Mr. Lindy's test scores. Add, get an answer, then divide by 2. Okay, so you can pause the video now, work out numbers 7 and 8. Okay, number 7, our x values are 2 and 1. So when we add those, we get 3. You need to divide that by 2. So our midpoint for number 7 is going to have an x value of 3 over 2. You could call that 3/2. You could call it 1.5. The y coordinates are -5 and 3. You need to add those. That gives you -2. Divide that by +2. So you get a -1. So our answer for number 7, hopefully you got this as well. The midpoint lives at 3/2, that's the x coordinate, and -1/2, that's the y coordinate. Number 8, the x coordinates are 0 and -4. I think you can tell what's directly in between there. It's going to be a -2. If you can't, you can do the math. 0 plus -4 gives you -4. -4 divided by 2 gives you -2. The y coordinates are +6 and -9. Let's use some math there. 6 plus -9 gives you -3. Divide that by 2 because we're averaging. -3 divided by 2. So the coordinates of your midpoint for number 8 would be -2 and 3/2.